Thank you so much for staying with us this Saturday morning. So it's a weekend, and many of us are easing into the day. Some are probably still in bed. Yes, I see you. Breakfast in bed, good idea. But let's have a straight talk and some sober reflection and hopefully some insight with our guest this morning. He's a senior advocate of Nigeria, a two-time governor of Lagos State, widely regarded for driving bold infrastructural reforms. He also served 8 years at the federal level as Minister of Power, Works and Housing, and then as Minister of Works and Housing, overseeing some of the most ambitious national projects in recent history. Please help me welcome, as you can see on the screen here, Mr. Babatunde Raji Fashola, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Ayo.
The first question I want to ask you is about your, but first of all, thank you so much for making out the time. It's about the statement you put out in the wake of the passing of President Buhari. You said some quite lofty things about him. And a number of people who have also worked with him have one thing or the other to say. I don't know if you can tell us whether or not you think we as Nigerians have quite come to terms with the reality of the fact that we lost someone so prestigious and so valuable.
Well, first of all, again, condolences to the country, to his family, and his close associates, as I also express condolences to the Oloris and the children of the Awujale of Ijebuland and to the government and people of Ogun State. All of this came together. I was on my way out of the country at the time. I got the notice of President Buhari's translation, and then, of course, much later in the day, Awujale's news broke. And what just occurred to me was perhaps more than a coincidence, that two very good friends decided to end their journeys amongst us on the same day. But back to Buhari, I think clearly a much misunderstood man. As I said in parts of that tribute, the efforts in his first coming to branded as war against indiscipline. Maybe it could have been branded differently, but his underlying ethos was to ensure that we lived as an orderly and law-abiding people. And that is a big plus for any nation. If you go to any country and you come away with the impression that, oh, these people are law-abiding, they're orderly, it's almost a place you want to go back to, it's a place you want to invest in. So, but again, those were some of the things that we didn't understand about him. I was making notes for a later contribution by way of a second book, and I had reserved a chapter that I called Buhari Laughs, Buhari Eats. He loved his food, and there were many parts of it that were much misunderstood, and I thought that those parts of it should have come out, but sadly, there will be extensions of that as we go on. On the political scene, of course, there is a vacuum that has to now be filled, and what it takes to fill that vacuum may not be easy to do in a short time. The nearest that one can reach back to another Buhari was Aminu Kanu. And after Aminu Kanu, there was no leader like that for a long time. And you can see the time it took for Buhari's leadership, his connection with the ordinary people to emerge. It took decades for that to happen. So whoever aspires to fill those shoes must understand the nature and the quantum of the journey they are undertaking.
It's quite a time that we're in, Mr. Fashola.
Well,
Well, it's
very
quite,
challenging and
yes.
interesting times.
Yes, I wanted to just bring up another perspective to that, because you talked about his politics and in the political sphere. I see that a good number of people across political divides, across party lines, you know, pay tribute to the family. You know, they honored him in death as well. And one of the questions, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, that people have started asking is what will happen to his political family? I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think in his lifetime, we already seen some movements and some reaffirmings as well. As people are moving, there were reaffirmings that this is where we are. And I recall a guest on your program, I think it was Farouk Aliu, who said that, look, listen, as far as this is concerned, the last word by the leader, President Buhari, was that he was staying in APC and he did not consider it just an advisory. He considered it an order. So we will wait and see.
All right. Well, still talking about his legacy. What are, in your opinion, would you consider his leadership and legacy that Nigerians must never forget? For instance, you have talked about the fact that he was misunderstood. But then there are those who would look at some of the impact of of the government and the one that he headed. And we'll look at the fact that on the one hand, as you said, he's a good man. He was visionary and all, the best way he could. But then he also led some people who may not be as supportive of his visionary direction as he himself was.
Well, I can't readily now say that there was one person in his government who was not supportive of his vision and direction at the time. And I think that people must have the courage of their convictions to say what they think. Uh, Not a few of us disagreed with some policies initiated not by Buhari, by ministers, departments, and agencies of government, and they came to council. And in that place, we spoke freely. Minutes were taken. But the fact that you disagree or I disagree did not necessarily mean that we disagreed with the government. We probably disagreed with the specific policy. And the principle is collective responsibility. If the majority vote that that policy must pass, you become bound by it, irrespective of the views that you take. So even at sub-national level, as a member of Governor Tinubu's, then Governor Tinubu's cabinet, I disagreed with some things, just as others did. It didn't mean that my disagreement or that of others carried the day. In some instances, it shaped the way conclusions were reached. But essentially, this was a team bound by the vision of one man, and we did the heavy lifting that we could, as you pointed out in your intro about my appearance. There were some really life-defining projects and undertakings that happened, and every government to its season. And as the popular word is, this is a continuum. It's a continuing journey of rebuilding Nigeria in phases and via administrations.
One of those instances, Mr. Fashola, is the borrowing, or rather the ways and means of the CBN governor at the time, which led to some printing of money in tens of trillions of naira, creating what economists consider a false hope, of an illusion of what our economy stood at, and that it is this present government that is bringing, the real issues, our way. We had a false exchange rate at the time, false look at the exchange rate. For instance, during the Buhari government, we understand it was something in the region of 400 or 500 naira to the dollar, but now the reality, according to this government, is it's actually a lot more than that, which has also been espoused by Mr. Oyedele initially. So some believe that as a leader, the government of the day, even in the executive council that you cited, must have been able to come out and say, guys, no, we are deceiving Nigerians. Can we give them the reality?
Now, I don't recall one meeting of the executive council in which the ways and means borrowing was presented to council. I don't recall it ever came to us. Perhaps it might have gone to the National Economic Council, but I am not aware of that. And again, there are committees in which some of us served and committees in which others didn't serve. So it never came, a Ways and Means report never came to the Federal Executive Council. And I stand to be contradicted on that. And I attended as many council meetings that I could, except when I was out of Abuja and some other official assignment. That said, let us also remember that at some point in the past, in the history of this country, the central bank used to be like a department of the Ministry of Finance. It was in the era of reforms of the 80s, late 80s into 90s, that the central bank became an autonomous organ of government responsible solely for monetary policy. And the idea was to bring it in conformity with global best practices where the executive, the sovereign, doesn't interfere with the control of monetary policy. So Buhari didn't create that either. That was law. And so there were certain things that the central bank did through its board, and it had impact, of course, on the nation. There was opportunity for oversight, for example, by the National Assembly. So some of the questions I asked myself when all this was going on, where was the parliament in terms of reining in, because they made the law. So there are things that the executive could do, there are things that parliament could do, there were things that they both could do. And my understanding, and so I remember at the time when currency was being changed, that was when I realized that looking at the law, there was a requirement for the government to approve, for the president to approve, and that led to what then happened at the time. But back to the subject of Ways and Means, the other point to make was that it was in a season, and I think if you decompose the entire borrowing, and I'm not making any factual thing here because I don't have the records, but I recall that in that season of post-COVID recovery, very few, if any, of the countries of the world didn't undertake some form of Ways and Means to reflate their economies. Now, whether we went over the top or not are matters that I believe are still, I don't have the documentation and the records to speak to those matters with any authority.
Well, still on CBN, but this time the governor specifically, one of the criticisms of the late President Buhari's government was that he could have reined in the CBN governor at the time, to the effect that even in the build-up to the 2023 elections, there were campaign posters, there were vehicles and all those things saying that the CBN governor wanted to contest for president. And there were insignia to show. There was never a rebuttal. Even the CBN governor never really confirmed nor rebutted it. So, and there are those who are wondering, the president could have said, look, guy, you can't be in government and still be doing this. Or do you think that's also something for the National Assembly?
I express no opinion on that matter. I think that the long-term effect of it have become manifest in what is going on, and the investigations and trials being undertaken. I express no opinion on the matter at all.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Fashola. So, we're still talking politics, and this time one of the reasons that I actually asked about the political family of President Buhari, or late President Buhari, is this conversation around coalition coming up here and there, opposition coalition coming up. There's a fresh push to unite opposition voices. And we've seen some people who in the old CPC, decamping from the APC and joining some other political forces here and there. And even some other, those other political forces have teamed up into the ADC. So the question a number of people are asking is, should the APC be concerned, Or is this deja vu from 2014?
Well, there are many things to take away from those developments. I think perhaps the first is that it puts a lie, a big lie, to the story making the rounds about 8 weeks ago that Nigeria was going to become a one-party state. So it puts a lie to that. Uh, the because there is an opposition of some quality, whatever that quality may be. The second point to make is that it is a manifestation of a right to choose, a freedom of choice, a freedom to associate, and one must respect that as I do. In terms of the political consequences, there are many things waiting to that I am waiting to see. Gathering ourselves together and saying we want to change Nigeria, we want to remake Nigeria, is all very well and good. What is the compelling alternative message? So that without a manifesto, without a program of action, I can't speak to how persuasive the coalition will be. But there's still a distance to run. So those are my initial thoughts. I respect and the rights to associate, and Nigeria perhaps benefits from the reawakening of opposition from what has been a long slumber, if you ask me. The opposition essentially abdicated their responsibility over the last 2 years, at the very least.
You know, Mr. Fashola, that should give some people concern. And I know it will be giving you concerns even if you can't really openly express it, because as a Democrat and as someone who has always championed constitutional alignment and all of that, the reasons, what reason do you think we can give to the fact that the opposition went into a slumber, excuse me, since the APC came into government?
I think the only people who can answer that question are those in opposition. You know, there's this book, I think, by Nigel Fletcher. It's called something Opposition Politics, Life in the Shadows. So I got a copy when we were in opposition, and I read it, and I saw in more practical and experienced presentation of life in opposition in the United Kingdom government. Because I entered politics, I entered the opposition side of politics when I became chief of staff to the governor in 2002, and we endured that for all of 13 years at least. And it came at a cost. There were things we were denied officially and unofficially. There were inducements from the back, come and join us, and so many other things. And it went as high as presidents using the leverage of being in the majority to throttle and frustrate. People will remember very, very famously and perhaps infamously the role that the federal government used FEMA to play in Lagos. And that was really making life difficult for us at the time. People will remember the seizure of local government monies, and people may not recall, it was six states that went to court. I think 5 of them were in the then PDP on local government creation. But they all jettisoned us, and it was only Lagos that pursued that case to the end. And there were so many other instances. So when I say that they went into a slumber, I mean, I haven't had a coordinated response, for example, to the 4 tax bills by any of the parties. And you can't be talking democracy without taxation. It's the heart and soul of democracy. What happens to the money bill, and how will monies be spent? Who will pay more? Who will pay less? And that, for me, was an abdication. We had, for example, the controversy in the very early life of Parliament. about how much it costs to buy a car for legislators to do their work. Opposition was missing in taking sides with the people at the time. So, and everybody justified why they should have a car. So, and you then wondered, really? There is no differing opinion? And so on. And I recall somebody put out a message at one time and said, look, listen, they miss the APC opposition.
Oh dear.
The APC was formed.
Please go ahead.
Now, how that narrative became reality is another matter for debate. So, as I said, I'm waiting for their plan of action, and then one can comment in more detail and specificity. But I respect the right to associate.
But you don't think, excuse me, you don't think that the APC has anything to fear, because there are quite strong political forces that have come together. You know that in the 2023 election, you know the numbers that the PDP got, the articles PDP got. You know the numbers that the Labour Party's LP got in the 2023 elections. If we put them together, they are way more than that of President Tinubu today. So you don't think there's anything for the APC to fear?
I have not said that. I have said that I respect their choice to associate. I have said that I am waiting to see a plan of action. Nigerians are going to have a say in what happens post this thing. And you see, I see elections as competitive sports. And in competitive sports, you must respect your opponent. And I have respected the opponent, the adversary. But fear is not a strategy to engage an opponent. And the thing is to say, okay, what is our A game and what is the opponent's A game? And we take it from there.
Well, still talking about defections, there have been a number of defections to the APC as well. Some governors have come into the APC, and a number of politicians are defecting to the APC. Do you think this is a healthy consolidation, or it's just mere survival politics?
Well, again, I am not in those states. Every politics is local, and whether it is one or the other, only those who make the decision are best suited to explain what it is. But the picture it certainly paints is a stronger APC. States that we have struggled to win before have come into our fold, and that will, of course, translate to redrawing the political map when election season comes up.
Well, Mr. Fashola, there are those who feel that, the defections into APC also signifies that these people coming from the various other political parties just freely and willy-nilly into the APC shows that there is no clear-cut identity for any political party in the country, and including the APC. There are those who also say that such defections will either enrich or dilute the APC's identity. What are your thoughts on that?
My first reaction is to re-quote myself, if that is something that is possible, that I consider political parties to be somewhat akin or metaphorically similar to houses of worship in the Abrahamic faiths, and that it is a house where you don't drive sinners from temples or churches or mosques, because it is a place of redemption, as it were, but you don't hand them the pulpit until they have fully repented. So it's a game of numbers. So every political party wants more people to come in. That's the first thing. I think the other point to make is that when we're looking for distinctions of ideas, we must first understand that the problems are the same. Whether it is healthcare, whether it is more money in my pocket, whether it is access to employment, whether it is small business challenge, whether it is infrastructure for transport, the problems are the same. What really differs are the mechanics by which one party sees the problem as distinct from how the other party sees the problem, and what are the methodologies by which they propose to address them. But the problems don't change. The intensity, of course, multiplies or diminishes as we go along. That is why, for me, it will be interesting to hear what the alternative narrative will be. And then that is when we can have rigorous debate, really, if you tell me how you will do things differently. It's not in one hand during the last election to say, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this. You didn't win the election, your opponent won the election, and then you come back to say, I would have done it differently. How differently would you have done it? Give us detail. Then we will tell you that this is what will happen if you do this, and this is what will happen if you do that. And this is not the only place that people cross. So I did some research over the few. There are many prominent politicians across the Atlantic have also changed parties, not once, not a few times. I think Nigel Farage, who is now head of Reform, which is like probably a local parallel here, moving away from, was in UKIP, and I think at some time it was in another party. President Donald Trump used to be a fundraiser and member of the Democratic Party before he got converted like the biblical Saul, and he's now the standard bearer of the Republican Party. And there have been a few governors across there. I think famously one time the governor of Florida who crossed from the Republican Party. So there are movements, perhaps not at the same frequency as ours.
Well, let's go to some governance issues now. You spoke about all politics being local the other time, and you also referenced something around local governments. I've been personally very, very concerned about about local politics. I believe, and I have seen this having had a stint at one local government or the other in Lagos State, that the first line of defense for security in Nigeria, which has collapsed as a result of the failure of the local government system, is the local government administrations, because they have their own security councils and all. And you may want to speak to that as a former governor, because it was in Oyo, or I think Ojo local government that I served with a civil servant at the time, and I saw the way they usually put themselves together. Now, it's been more than a year since the Supreme Court ruled, reinforced the local government autonomy issue, pretty much emphasizing, according to the Supreme Court, what the Constitution says. Yet it seems that implementation remains frozen. In your opinion, what's blocking progress? What are they legal limitations, political resistance, or cultural factors? Or you think this whole idea is a farce?
Well, before I respond to that, let me just first go back to the point you made about something collapsing. So I think mindset and attitude and this mentality is always important. My mentality is always a positive one. So I don't see collapse in whatever sense you see. I see a need to improve, and therefore it's aspirational for me. The job never finishes. But in terms of local governments, really, I think that the debate we must have is whether we really want autonomous local governments. It's a debate that must be had. As it stands today, it is unrealistic to expect autonomy for local governments created by the Constitution. They were not meant to be autonomous. That is my view after a very, very close reading of certain provisions of the Constitution. Some of those provisions provide, for example, that the local government in its economic activities and all of that will have laws made for it by the State House of Assembly. If you look at the legal and ordinary meaning of the word autonomy, it suggests that you are acting independently without any outside influence and authority. And to that extent, a state house of assembly making laws for what and how a local government can function is in itself an external influence that contradicts the idea of autonomy. The next thing, of course, is to look in the fourth schedule of the Constitution and look at all of the responsibilities that are assigned to local governments, such as the operation of slaughterhouses, abattoirs for animals, cemeteries, building of roads, advertising hoardings, primary schools, primary healthcare centers. All of those responsibilities are dependent on one item, land. And to the extent that the state government controls land, which affects how the local governments will carry out these functions, I didn't think that autonomy was intended. Now, if we now decide that we want autonomous local government, those are some of the things we have to free up, if that is our decision. So we must have an agreement, but as it stands, I don't think that autonomy was intended. What I think was intended was some sort of collaboration, some sort of supervision, some sort of oversight of the state over the local government. And that is inherent in what you will find in section 162, which deals with the state joint local government account. And there is history behind the enactment of that section, because up till 1999, the local governments used to collect their monies directly from the federation account under a process that I think was known as JAC, Joint Accounts and Allocation something. But in the advent of the democratic era, it was found out that there were so many of them, or not a few of them, who had defaulted in the very basic obligation of paying staff salaries, primary healthcare workers, primary school teachers, salaries and pensions, and there was a backlog of debt. And I met some of that debt when I became governor, and we were working then. And I think that is partly the history behind the creation of the state joint local government account, to ensure that there was some supervision. Whether the supervisors have now become as culpable as those they were supervising is another narrative entirely.
Well, so, and that's quite elucidating. So would you then support direct federal allocations to LGs? Maybe I should put it this way. How then does the Supreme Court ruling, in your opinion, differ or align with the Constitution and the things that you're saying?
Now, that's an interesting one. So I've read the judgment, all of the judgments. And the first point to note is that given the allegations and the reportage of what was going on in some local governments, there was no patriot who would say in good conscience that there was not the need for some action to be taken, as initiated by the learned Attorney General. There was no patriot who would say, oh, everything was fine. You can't say that. Something had to be done. But the question then is, did the Supreme Court have the benefit of some of the history that I referred to in the arguments that are presented to them, and whether or not the Supreme Court then appropriately deployed the tools at its disposal to cure the remedy, to remedy the ailment that had been presented to them. And you will see from the legal commentaries post the judgment that a lot of people were of the view that, well, there was the need to act. But lawyers, senior lawyers, were divided about whether or not that judgment could stand constitutional scrutiny beyond that purpose, and whether it was just a policy judgment, which again, Supreme Court is a policy court. But when you look at the tools that they deployed, was how to interpret the word shall, and they said it was permissive, as they have done rightly in some other cases. You will see that in that court there was a dissent. One of the justices dissented on that interpretation and said, no, I don't agree with this, but I agree that we need to act. I agree that certain people shouldn't do certain things, but I don't agree with this interpretation. And so you will see even a divided court on a very narrow point of interpretation. But again, the kind of assistance they got from counsel and all the time they had to prepare with the backlog of cases that they have. But here we are, that is the judgment. That is the judgment, and we must live with it until. And as we continue to implement that judgment, we will see what one may call matters that will arise post the implementation, and we will go from there.
But do you think that is that's partly responsible for the delay in the execution?
Well, I don't have information, honestly. You see, I'm no longer, I'm like you now. You have more information than me. So I don't have first-line information about what's going on. So without facts, it's hard to form an opinion.
But it also makes it raises another question. The judiciary, and you operate in that space, have received not a few bashings from time to time, particularly because the law, I beg your pardon, the courts, federal, high courts, appeal courts, even the Supreme Court, will come up with judgments, rulings, and they will go unobeyed, and nobody is going to obey them for a long time. And then sometimes they will still come back to the same court to get another judgment on the same issue, and it will still go on without being obeyed, without them being complied with, without being enforced. So that's the challenge, the question that's coming up here, Mr. Fashola.
So I can't. You don't mention specifically now any one judgment that has not been obeyed.
Well, this LG ruling is one, for instance, sir.
But you are seeing that we're seeing now that states are conducting elections, which was one of the issues there. You must be democratically elected to benefit from whatever. I don't know for a fact whether any state that has not conducted elections when they have fallen due has been paid. But I do know that one or two states have had supposedly their allocations either withheld or delayed or something like that, and it is affecting administration at the local level. As I said, the full implementation of the impact of the decision will take time to unfold, and then we will have a better picture of whether or not this was what was intended. For example, if you go into section 162 in detail, there are subsequent subsections there, and there are other sections. But I think the pivotal section was the one about states joins local government, and that they should distribute the monies to the state. They should allocate the money to the state, who then goes to distribute. There's a preceding subsection there, which says that each state shall open a state joint local government account. So the question to ask is that if the Supreme Court has said that the shall in that provision of, I think, 1625 is permissive, does it mean then that 1624, if that is the correct one, becomes permissive too, and states are relieved of the burden of opening that account, and they may or may not open it, even when their local governments are democratically elected? That is one impact. The other impact is that there is another mandatory account for the Judicial Service Commission, I think, and NJC. And there is also a mandatory word that certain accounts shall be open for fund. Has that also become permissive? Because it wasn't considered in this case. But if the precedent is that the word shall in that section of the Constitution shall be permissive and not mandatory, does it affect all the other subsections where that word is used? Those are outcomes to be dealt with later.
You know, just recall, it just brings to mind that case, the Natasha Apoti and the Senate case, where some people say that it's like the judgment was saying, was being more suggestive than emphatic, but that's another conversation for another day. But you've raised constitutional issues, and of course, that there is a call for a new constitution, a growing agitation for a completely new constitution. Now, as a senior advocate and someone who has operated the Constitution, both as a legal practitioner and as an executive in government. Do we really need a new Constitution, or the problem we have is that of implementation of the current one? Because that's another opinion that's out there.
My answer is that there is never a perfect constitution, and that is why constitutions are amended either by pursuing the amendment process prescribed for it, or they are amended by judicial contestations, where certain provisions are either then modified as a result of judicial interpretation. And all of these are a call to a better life, ultimately. So I respect many members of the Patriots, but the question I have asked myself is that, is this what Chief Rotimi Williams would have done? Is this what Ben Nwabeze would have done if they were alive? And I asked that question in this context. I think I've heard one of the reasons adduced for wanting to have a new constitution was that, well, it was not made by the Nigerian people and it was made by the military administration. That is a lie. I say that with great respect. It's a lie. And all you need to do is to go and read the report of Justice Nikitobi, who was chairman of the Constitution Debate Coordinating Committee, who was asked to review coordinate the debate for the 1995 Constitution, which was then the operative, the Constitution in contemplation. And they issued a call for memoranda. And memoranda were submitted within Nigeria and abroad. Forums, debates were held in the United States of America, reports were sent to them. There were zonal consultations as we have them when Constitution is being amended now. And their report showed that the overwhelming request of Nigerians was that they wanted the 1979 Constitution back with some amendments. That is what was reenacted in the 1999 Constitution. And I'm not the first person to say this. I think it was Simon Kolawole of this day who had written and published parts of this. So if the reason for wanting change is based on a false premise that the Constitution was not something from Nigerian people, it was by the military or whatever, then it's on a false premise. The second argument that I hear is that, well, there's too much power in the hands of the second argument is that we're a unitary state and so they want a federal constitution. Again, I disagree with great respect. And I've addressed this in my book, The National Public Discourse. Nigeria, under this constitution, is not a unitary state. And I remain willing and ready to debate this matter. If it sounds like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it must be, and it is a duck. And I say this for the following reasons. We have multi-level governments in that constitution, local, state, and federal. We have executive at the state and local and federal level. We have a judiciary at the state, local, and federal level. Customary courts and local courts. So the only thing perhaps we don't have is a constitutionally separated law enforcement capacity. Constitutionally separated. And I tested that for emphasis. Because the truth is that in my own state, for example, as in some other states, we have CAI, which is an environmental sanitation police. We have LASMA, which is traffic police. So perhaps the debate about changing the constitution will be, look, listen, how do we create a constitutional framework for states to have their own law enforcement capacity? Because they have judiciary, they have legislative authority, they have executive authority. So why should it not have law enforcement authority? That doesn't make us unitary, not in the least. If most of the parts are federal, then the quest for a more federal union doesn't make us unitary. So I think those are the kind of specific debates I would like to see, not a generalized one that it is unitary. The last point I think that has been made about the need for this constitution is that There's too much power in the hands of the federal. Yes, that may be right. That is probably so. But the question to ask is, what have we done as a people at other levels of government with the powers that have been taken away from the federal? How have we managed that power at subnational level? In 1999, I recall that the federal government assumed that it had power over planning and urban development in the state. So if you wanted to build a house from any part of Nigeria, you needed to come to Abuja to get a permit. The Tinubu government challenged that and won by a 4-3 decision in the Supreme Court. So that's one power taken away. In my time, we challenged lotteries, we challenged, what was the other one? Tourism, successfully, which were matters that were reflected somewhat, or the federal government felt it had control of. And we won. So those are other matters that have been taken away by judicial action from the federal executive. In the amendments and alterations that have taken place in the last few years, unlike when I was governor, electricity has now been fully decentralized to the states. Rail has been fully decentralized. States can now have their rail. We didn't have it, so we had to take permission from President Yar'Adua to start the Blue Line at the time. And I think what has been, prisons have been taken away. So how many states have built new prisons? And we're talking of prison congestion. How many states have built intra-city rails where we have urban mass transit challenges? And how many states have solved the electricity problem now that every state can operate? So it's not necessarily the case, therefore, that it is just because of this or because of that the country is not working. So I would like a constitutional amendment that says, look, I don't like section this and that, and this is my reason. This is my proposed amendment, and this is what it will mean. Then we can have a real debate. But if it's just to reenact a constitution that says we the people, then you say the executive has this, the legislature has this, the judiciary has this. These were some of the things that Justice Nikitobi complained about then, that the frequency with which we amend our constitution is not consistent with global best practice and behavior. And at the end of the day, as I said in one speech that I gave, I think what the people want is a better life, not a better document, even though a better document is desirable.
Interesting. So do you think that the issue of restructuring is already being taken care of with these issues that you raised?
From all of the things I said, some of the powers that the federal government had are now being ceded to the state, either by deliberate amendments by parliament or as a result of judicial action. And there's a book, I think it's the story or the history of the United States Supreme Court. It was written by a chap called Peter Irons. And you will see how there's a parallel here in how the United States Supreme Court helped in the making of the United States Constitution by judicial interpretations and judgments. So some of the restructuring is happening, but there might be other compelling ones. For example, I would like to see an amendment in the Constitution that deals with citizenship. If women have equal rights, and I argue that they do, if women have equal rights, why should a foreign woman who marries a Nigerian be entitled to Nigerian citizenship, and a foreigner male who marries a Nigerian woman can't have the same citizenship? That's something I would like to see as a specific item. And there are others that I can't readily think of. So let's have the debate about specificity instead of just creating an unreal process to say, just throw away this document. It's like a surgeon telling you that, okay, you are not feeling well, but I'm going to take out all your organs and just replace all of them. And you will wonder, is it all my organs, or is it my brain or my heart or my liver that is the problem?
Thank you so much. There is one other issue that's been on the hearts of Nigerians, and that is the economy. And I'm sure it's something you've heard about as well. First of all, we'll talk generally, and then we'll probably go into some specifics, drawing from your experience as well in government at the federal level. The economy today, some people say, feels like a paradox, reforms on paper, but real pain in people's lives. It would seem then that on the one hand, the federal government is doing something for the people, but the people are feeling something entirely different. Is it a challenge of poor management or poor communication? Or is there anything really happening that the people should be feeling, but they're not feeling yet?
You know, when you talk about poor communication, I've served at different levels of government, and no level of government that I served in ever got a pass mark for proper communication. So it's a problem everywhere. No government has ever been criticized or commended for over communicating. We are all guilty always of under communicating. And that is because really the problems that those in government have to deal with is a lot. I put it this way: when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you see are problems. And while you are grappling with which one you can easily solve, you will see more problems during the day. And by the time you are going to bed at night, you will still see problems. If you are unfortunate enough and you dream, you will dream problems. So while you are dealing with all of that, communication becomes quite challenging. And that said, let us also understand that the infrastructure and the concept of communication has changed radically. So everybody is now his own broadcaster. Everybody is now his own editor. Everybody is connected. Nobody is in control. So I can make my own broadcast. And it is therefore different from the days when all of us took information only from NTA or only from FRCN. There are hundreds of broadcast stations now at the onset of privatization. There is also now social media. So on what platform? So if I'm talking to you, if those who are not watching your TV station, I'm not talking to them. It's just that simple. And there are many TV stations they can watch now. So that is a problem for those in government and for those out of government to also understand that you just need to be everywhere. Some people don't watch television again. So you need to go and speak to them on social media. And in speaking to them, you have to find the balance not to leave those who are still television people behind so that you get the aggregate. Now, that's what was the other point you made?
No, the other part of it is whether it is poor management or not, or whether maybe there are real change happening.
The government is doing a lot, and the yes. Other point to make is that there is always a distance between government policy, government programs, and projects arising from those policies and results. There's always time. There's a lead time. So it's not a switch that you flip, and it's not fast food. So you were talking about for example, earlier on, Mr. Oyedele talking about tax reforms and that things are going to get cheaper apparently next year when the law kicks in. Now, one of the things I've followed, I'm waiting to see a clean copy of all the bills because what I saw were the draft, and I know that some things have changed. But one thing that didn't change was the tax relief to those at the base of the income pyramid. And if you use the minimum wage now, you will see that averagely about 14,000, 15,000, if my math is correct, is going to accrue to everybody within the minimum wage. So each income earner and perhaps each household will get that extra money. That is more money for food, more money for fuel, for your bills, and whatever else. So that is essentially like government giving you extra money. So if you do the math, I think the data we had then was 45 million households. So if you just do the math of 1 million households, you're looking at probably like 15 billion naira, if my math is correct. And if you are looking at 10 million households, you're looking at about 150 billion naira every month in the formal economy where you are recording people. Additional spending money that comes to the market. That is going to drive trade. It is going to drive demand and supply of so many things. And the money will trickle down to the poorest of the poorest who support and provide services. That is one thing that is underway. There are many other things that we will not see the results until they fructify, if you like. But there's a distance between policy, the programs and the projects, and then the results.
Well, maybe the government has to find a way to communicate a lot more than it does, because you know very well, and it's something that you've done quite well over time. Communication builds trust, and without it, people are going to just fill in the blanks. But talking about...
I'm sure those in government are listening to you, so
okay.
they will take on your...
Now, talking about, communication, help us speak to this. Earlier, we showed a bridge on air along the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. I'm sure it must have disturbed you as well when you saw that bridge while the road itself, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, was being constructed. It started from nowhere, and then from nowhere, just over the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. So one wonders, first of all, what are your thoughts? What is the story, if you can give us an idea of what the story behind this bridge is? Because unless something is done as quickly as possible, this bridge could collapse and it'll shut down the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway.
Now, I think I recall this image back then. But the story is this. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway was designed as a 2-lane, 3-lane dual carriageway. And 2-lane dual carriageway, yes. And at the time, when Alhaji Okunu, the then Federal Commissioner for Works, was presenting the memo to council for the construction of the road, they decided to leave a land bank in the middle for future expansion. It is that land bank that has formed the basis of the expansion that you now see in the reconstruction of that road to 3 lanes. But the character of the neighborhood, the entire stretch, has changed from what it was in 1981, I think, when the road was opened. Schools, places of worship, more factories have opened up, vehicular traffic, density has increased, and that is what that bridge seeks to address. Because what we focused on, because of the limitation of resources in my time, was let us restore first the main carriageway that people are used to so that they can get on with their lives. There are service lanes that were part of the design that have not been built. And that bridge was to descend to an interchange that would take you in and out of those service lanes, like what you have on the Third Mainland Bridge, where you climb and descend and all of that, those interchanges. Now, we couldn't complete this bridge, this link to the interchange, because there were land issues where the ramp should descend, and that is a state matter. And I recall then that there were images of myself and Governor Dapo Abiodun going to one of these bridges, because that's not the only one. There were a couple asking him to please help to resolve the land acquisition problem, because without it, the work would not be finished. Now, what happened in this case was an overloaded truck, again, in a clear breach of law and order on the highway, who had cargo on its rear in excess of the approved headroom. All over the world, there are minimum standards of headroom, and I think the minimum is about 4.8 meters, and it goes on up to 5.2 meters. So trucks are designed to also ensure that they do not exceed this headroom, except people choose to act clearly unlawfully, and that was what happened in this instance. I think it was carrying, it was a truck or a flatbed that was carrying a caterpillar or some strange thing like that. And when he got there, he couldn't pass. Instead of going to do the right thing, offload the cargo and then get the right vehicle and the machine to go underneath, he just forced his way through. And that was what happened here.
Okay, well...
And I recall then that we sent our head of bridges to inspect the damage. But because the work wasn't finished, we just took the view that since it is not yet in use, when the reconstruction starts, all of any structural damage or whatever will be remedied along with the actual completion of the work. But that's as far as I recollect that things were. And we escalated that because the vehicle, I think, was then arrested. So I escalated this, I think, in a letter to the head of the FRSC to initiate prosecution against the driver and the owner of that vehicle. I can't remember in my memory, but I know I have documentation about those correspondence. Because it was clearly an unlawful act.
Absolutely. But what do you think would happen now? Because clearly this bridge has been compromised. The integrity of its integrity has been compromised. And God forbid that anything happens in any time, it will definitely shut down the bridge, the road. And you know how long it took us to get here thanks to your efforts. So what do you think should be done now?
Well, there's clearly physical damage in terms of the extent of structural integrity and ultimate danger. Well, the eyes suggest something, but this is very specialized capacity in the engineering field. And I think that the officers of the Federal Ministry of Works, the controller of Ogun, Lagos, or your state, depending on whose jurisdiction this bridge falls in, will be either listening or will get information of the need to act to prevent any further damage or threat to life.
Thank you, sir. I had so many other questions on the economy, but we're running out of time, and I'm having some feedback from some people watching us right now. John wrote in, he says, despite the provisions in the 1999 Constitution that tend to portray Nigeria as a federal system of government, the country is not a true federal system of government. Two major aspects of federalism, such as resource control and law enforcement, are still concentrated in the center. With due respect to the learned silk on your program, the centrality of these elements, these key elements, makes Nigeria a quasi-federal system of government. And he says, God bless Nigeria, sir.
So I agree that there is no perfect federation. I said that much in my opening, and that the quest is for a more federal constitution. I didn't disagree with that, but to then say it's unitary is not the reason. Wanting to be more masculine is different from saying I am feminine.
All right, well, Festus Akinboyewa is speaking in a similar light, but here's his comment. What we need in Nigeria urgently are researchers, developers, and entrepreneurs in every sector and every ward, and not a new constitution. Do you agree with him?
Again, look, there is a part of the new constitution that an amendment to a constitution I would like to see. One of them is the one I've addressed. In fact, whilst I was undertaking some research on local governments not too far back, I discovered that the fifth alteration of the 1999 Constitution had actually corrected the earlier error in the 1999 Constitution that Nigeria had 774 local governments. We never had 774 local governments. We had, I think, 768 local governments and 6 area councils in Abuja. So that amendment has just been made. And many, including yours truly, have always quoted 774 local governments and are still quoting it. But that's another amendment that has taken place, albeit not costly. So you will see now that because Abuja is not a state, so it doesn't have local government. It has area councils. And that change has now been made. So there's work going on at some part that perhaps we are not even tracking, we're not paying attention to, or perhaps it's not being communicated enough, as you said, hey.
All right. Well, this one is from Tola. It says, I prefer a virtuous democracy rooted in development plans rather than visionary authoritarianism. Political parties are more about different ways of financing the plan and prioritizations. We must move away from messianic thinking politics. That's the opinion of Tola in this note. Fashola, even though we've spent quite some time.
Well, we have development plans. We have infrastructure master plans. We reviewed the 2016 or 15 infrastructure master plan that we met. We made a development plan post-recession, the economic recovery and growth plan. Then we left a development plan up to 2025, and I'm sure the administration is already planning another development plan going forward if they haven't already launched it, but I didn't catch that somewhere. So all of these things are going on, and I think it's for us to perhaps look for more information, and as you said, perhaps for also government to share more information with us in the places where we receive information, because if you either go to some portal or whatever, you will find some of these things there.
Well, the questions are just keep pouring in, and I really must close now. Is this a question that has been sent in, and I'm trying to locate it as well here. It's talking about the census, and I don't have that information yet, but I really would love to have it. Someone is saying that that the fact that we don't have a proper census is hindering development and proper planning. We're not able to really plan. There are those who are saying, okay, we are 200 and something million people. Some are saying we're not up to 200 and something million people.
I agree with that person who says that a census is not only necessary, we have left it far too late. From the last administration in which I served, from the one before, it's just too late. And we must do it because it is critical to everything we do. I always relate a census to having a party where you don't know how many guests are coming. How many drink water? How many drink fruit juice? How many drink alcohol? How many are allergic to this menu? That's how to plan. And as long as we are providing services, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, whether it's roads, whether it's hospitals, schools, how many children exist? How many are going to come in the next few hours that we must prepare maternity centers for? And they must go to school in about 5 or 6 years. We must have numbers with which to plan. And as I've said privately, I don't think we're up to 200 million people. I don't think so. I think that, and some people are already saying we are 230 already. Depending on who you speak to, the numbers keep changing. And you can't plan with such volatile and extreme numbers. We may well be over 200, but there is no evidence to convince me that we are that many.
Well, Chigozie wants you to answer that question, and you have, but he also says, I should ask you, what happened about your book about concerning the proper census that you launched in 2015. I'm guessing that he will have to send you an email to get that answer. Thank you so much for that one, for your time this morning. We're going to have to bring you back. I know you don't like to talk to the press anymore, but thank you so much for making the sacrifice. Truly appreciate your time this morning. Mr. Babatunde Fashola is a former two-time governor in Lagos, as well as an 8-year minister at the federal level. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a good week.
And you too, sir.